Hey, hello everyone. Hello, Justin.
Hello.
So we will maybe wait just 1 minute before getting started. And this event will be recorded, so everyone will have the record just after this event. But we will also share it on YouTube. It will be on our LinkedIn account, I think, and on our YouTube channel. So you will be able to share it after if you heard something interesting. So that I hope with you, Justin. Hope. So you mentioned you traveled a lot right now. So you have some events coming up in the next days.
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. We had KubeCon out in Atlanta last week, and some of you may be aware that Atlassian has acquired DX officially as of the 10th of this month. So that's been very exciting. And I was out for Atlassian Developer Days in Seattle. And then we are hosting our own event this evening in San Francisco. And then I'll fly after that event to the AI Code Summit in New York. It's actually going on right now, but I'll be speaking on Thursday. So it's a busy time, but it's an exciting time, right? Everybody wants to know about the research that we've been doing around AI and AI impact, and obviously very happy to share a lot of that today. So
Yeah, that's exactly why you are here today, because a lot of people that I talk with ask me the question about how to measure the impact of AI and how to improve the productivity of the team using AI. So yeah, thank you again, Justin, for being here. I'm really happy to have this discussion with you and with a lot of people that can hear us. So today we will discuss about how to measure the ROI of AI, how to improve the impact of using AI for the development teams. And it will be structured in three parts. So the first part will be about how to measure the impact of the AI, what are the metrics that you used within your framework, and do those metrics are really different from the before AI age? Is it the same metric, or do you have some new metrics that are used right now, nowadays within the team? And the second section will be about why do you think there is so much difference between companies using AI? We heard a lot of very good company with really great outcome, and a few other and a lot of other companies just struggling to get some results using AI. So it will be really interesting to hear what are your thoughts about that. And the last thing would be about maybe some use cases or some secret sauce or tips that distinguish the best companies using AI and getting a lot of results, and the one just struggling also to get a good result. And I think within this section, we will speak a bit about context engineering. No spoiler. So yeah, thank you again. I'll let you present yourself and yeah, start the presentation. We will have this discussion. And yeah, for the people joining, you can ask your question within the question tab directly, and we will keep some time at the end of the meeting before your flight to San Francisco, Justin. So not too much time to take the question and to discuss about them. So yeah, feel free to ask question for Justin or for me at the end of the meeting or during the meeting. So yeah, the floor is
thanks so
yours.
much, Arthur. Really happy to be here. Happy to speak with all of you today. I'm Justin Reock. I am the Deputy CTO at DX. My background is primarily in software development. I spent a long time of my career writing code. I've been writing code professionally since the late 90s. So I want to stress that I am on this journey too, trying to get more reflexive in my use of AI and really try to discover various use cases that actually help me be more productive and in my work. But I think like a lot of you who are senior, this has been a big year. I think that a while ago, this technology didn't work quite as well as it works now, and it still certainly has some quirks. But I just want to stress that I'm in this with you. I was skeptical at first, and I have now gotten more bullish about where this technology can be helpful, and we do have some data to support it. But it's not all rosy, and we'll get into that as well. So moving along, a lot of what you're going to see here in terms of these trends and statistics and tips are actually written up in a guide that we've published. It's just a free guide that's out there on our website. And I'll flash this QR code again near the end of the talk if you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to get that, but maybe you'll have more interest once we've gone through some of these tips and some of these facts. DX, we do have our platform, but we also produce a ton of research. And that's, I would say, half of the work that I do is really just research on various trends around developer productivity. And certainly over the last 6 months, it's been research about AI. So a lot of what you're going to see in this session is just trends and research that we've dug up, just looking at our customers and looking at other businesses, and even citing other studies and things like that, like our friends in the Dora community and people like that. Okay, so AI adoption, according to our samples right now, is swelled to over 90% of engineers and even like engineering managers and product designers and project managers, saying that they are using AI at least at a light amount right now. And most are moving into what we would consider moderate, which means using it in a substantive way, like at least weekly. And this has happened very quickly, right? We back in April, Dora released a study showing that the overall adoption rate was more like 25%. So we've really seen a quick uptick in utilization of this technology. And we're seeing that over, again, this kind of large sample size of engineers that we've pulled from our own platform, that we're saving on average about 3.8 hours a week using the technology, specifically using like coding assistance and code completion use cases for AI. Also things like test case generation, documentation generation, things like that. And as Arthur mentioned, we're going to get into some of those like really high value use cases across the SDLC later in this session. But that 3.8 hours a week, that's good. It is good, right? That's time saved. But I think that for most organizations, we find that code generation was never maybe really the primary bottleneck, right? There's other factors that I think are going to be eclipsing some of these time savings, where we need to start getting really creative and really thoughtful about whether or not AI can help us with some of those other sources of toil and friction and obstacles to productivity. In terms of what we see industry-wide, nobody really knows what's going on. We've got Google telling us that they're saving 10%, that they're becoming 10% more productive. That's Google. Of course, they were already a highly productive engineering organization. But then on the flip side, we have this kind of now infamous METR meter study and there were some problems with the study. It's not a perfect study, but it showed that even though engineers felt and had the perception of being more productive, the data actually bore out that they were 19% less productive. Now, there were some issues. There were only a few people on this open source development team that were like familiar with Cursor and had been using it regularly. But it's still, I think, what the most interesting takeaway here is not necessarily the 19%. It's that engineers had the perception of better productivity, but in this case, they actually weren't more productive. So I think what we're really seeing is some volatility. And what's, we're seeing some of these industry reports come out providing like averages, showing us, like we're seeing on average, a 7.5% increase in overall documentation quality, or a 3.4% increase in code quality. This came from the Dora study earlier in this year. But these averages are not even really telling us the full story. We dug into our own data, and when we looked at an average filter, we saw similar stuff to what Dora found. What you're looking at right now is a qualitative metric called change confidence. This is how confident engineers feel that when they release something that they're not going to break production. And this is what's called a top box Likert scale. And the way to think about that is that this is the percentage of people who answered with a positive response to how they felt about code change confidence. So this means like if you've seen those surveys where it's like always, very often, this is the percentage of people who answered either always or very often. And you see that for AI users, these are moderate AI users, they were 2.6% more likely to answer positively, that they felt confident in the changes they were making. Very similar here, this modest positive leaning trend with code maintainability. And with change failure rate, we saw this 0.11% reduction when we started adopting AI to the overall change failure rate, which doesn't seem like much. But then if you think about the industry benchmark for change failure rate being about 4%, it becomes a little bit more significant, but still not not crazy, right? These are modest improvements when we look at averages. So we thought, well, there's got to be more to this story, because we're talking to organizations that do feel like it's doing good for them, but we're also talking to organizations that are actually kind of worried or feeling like that it's not having positive impacts. So we decided to break a lot of this data down per company, and here's what we saw. All right, each bar on this graph represents a single company. This is, again, the change confidence qualitative metric, but look at what's happening here. We have some companies that are seeing as much as 20% or more increases in their overall change confidence, but we're seeing the opposite too. We're seeing some companies that are decreasing by about the same amount. That's why these industry averages aren't telling us a full story, and they may in some cases even be giving us a bit of a false sense of security around this technology, because there are definitely organizations that are struggling too. Similar pattern with code maintainability, right? On an average, we see these positive, modest gains, but we definitely see organizations struggling here too. And finally, change failure rate. We see massive shifts here as well. Sometimes a 2%, you don't want to be on the top of this line. This means a 2%, up to a 2% increase in change failure rate. Again, against that industry benchmark of 4%, that could mean as many as 50% more defects shipped as a result of moderate use of AI. So I think the big takeaway here is that we're just not seeing even distribution of ROI right now. Some organizations are seeing positive impacts, but others are really struggling and even seeing these negative impacts. And we know that patterns like, for instance, top-down mandates aren't really working, and are even in some cases decreasing psychological safety. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Like, what can we do to first of all figure out where we are as organizations on this scale? And then what can we do to work to be on the positive end of these trends?
That's really interesting, because that's exactly what we saw when we discussed with companies in France or even in the US. There is a huge gap between companies, and you always hear about the greatest company and the greatest increase in productivity, or the number of line of code that has been generated with AI. But then when you in your company struggle to get some results, you think that you are all alone in your case, and maybe your team is or a lot of bad engineers, etc. But that's really not the case. That's so new, so hard to handle, and there is a lot of different things to do. That, yeah, I'm not surprised by the fact that there is such a difference between companies.
Yeah, I think that really, when you look past the hype, that of course this is going to be the reality, right? I think like anything else, there's a right way and a wrong way to use this technology, and of course a right way and a wrong way to measure, right? And the good
Yes.
news is that we do have some metrics. The good news is that we can get into some data that can help us and help our organizations understand where we are and where we need to make improvements. And so we'll talk a little bit about that right now. At the highest level, we want to be thinking about speed, and we want to be thinking about quality, right? We want to see, okay, are we actually moving faster? Are we able to ship more features? Are our engineers able to work on more new features and respond to customer feedback in a way that hopefully generates more revenue for our companies? But are we doing that at the cost of quality, right? Are we doing that and just trading all of this velocity today for technical debt down the road that we'll have to pay when our code becomes less maintainable and perhaps more complex? One trend that we've definitely seen is, yeah, we may see a higher PR throughput, but a lot of these PRs are bigger and more complex than they need to be, right? So, we'll ship something that maybe could have been written in 20 lines of code, and instead it's 100 lines of code. And what does that do for our code base on aggregate, right? Farouk is making the point about using AI is like trying to scale. It magnifies what works well and what works not that well. You are completely correct. In fact, we're even starting to call this agent X, or agent experience, which is a little bit ironic, because it means basically that what's good for developers, small incremental changes, fast test cycles, good documentation, good healthy CI pipelines, those are also good for agents. And if we have bad code hygiene and bad health, then yes, we're just accelerating bad practice. So yeah, that's a really good point, Farouk. And then Laurent is asking, you know, would you say the top performer are experiencing the biggest benefits and the lowest performer? Absolutely. Yes, because this isn't just about, oh, we're not being more productive. This could actually be about we are significantly less productive because we're reverting more of our PRs. We're having to spend more time on reviews that don't end up making it to production. So we end up creating more toil. Yeah, so it's really important that we get this right. So anyway, we can look at some of these speed metrics like PR throughput, time savings per developer, but we want to balance this with quality and maintainability metrics. We want to make sure that we're also paying close attention to that. There are several kinds of metrics that we can look at, and we have to look at all three because they have pros and cons, right? We have these telemetry metrics that are coming out of the APIs. And that's giving us some data about, you know, who's using the technology and how many people in the organization are using it. But we want to be careful with this stuff too, because a lot of companies are like, well, we have to get to 100% adoption of AI in the company. And it's like, okay, well, but what does that mean? Like, if you have 100% of the people using AI like every day, great, but what are they doing? Like, how do we know that that's actually increasing any productivity, especially if it's mandated? Because I can use AI every single day. If you tell me I have to, I will update my README file every morning and I will make zero impact to the actual code base, but my utilization metrics, my telemetry metrics are going to look great. So there's other issues with these too. They don't always tell a complete story. Like, for instance, acceptance rate versus suggested rate was a popular metric to look at a few months ago. But we've swiftly realized that, well, first of all, for the API to even know that the code has been accepted, the engineer has to click accept in the IDE. They might not do that, right? They might just look at the suggestion and then move from there. Or who's to say that they accepted those lines of code, but then rewrote every single one of them, right? And so has that actually helped with productivity? It's not the full picture. So we also need to look at experience sampling metrics. So this is things like adding 1 or 2 new form fields to like a PR request, for instance, and saying maybe a checkbox that says, I used AI to work on this PR, or I enjoyed using AI to work on this PR, right? To be able to get some developer satisfaction metrics in there as well. That can be very helpful, but not great for collecting large amounts of data. So at DX, we also recommend, you know, structuring and engineering highly effective surveys. And by highly effective, I mean 90% plus participation with questions that are very clear that what we're asking about are the system and not the individual, right? We really classify developer experience as much more of a systems problem than a people problem. And the qualitative data that we capture should reflect that. That's going to make engineers a lot more honest, and I would say even excited to take part in some of these samples, as long as we don't run them too often. But when we pull the 3 of these together, we can start actually getting a picture of where we are and where we should be focusing on improvements. And we were first to market with what we call our DX AI measurement framework. And this is, if you're familiar with like the DX Core 4, which I will briefly introduce for those who haven't seen it. This is very much influenced by the same way that we structured the Core 4 metrics. The Core 4 is a distillation of Dora, Space Framework, and the DevX metrics. And so we did the same thing here. We took some prescribed metrics and then we categorized them into these 3 different dimensions of utilization, impact, and cost. So with utilization, we get an idea of what's happening with the technology. Do we have daily active users, weekly active users, that sort of metric. We want to be able to look at the percentage of PRs that are AI assisted. And again, we could use something like experience sampling to get that. Percentage of committed code that's AI generated. It's actually not bad to gather that data qualitatively either. Engineers have a pretty good idea of how much that is. And we're also working on some technology to look at the file system and pull some system metrics on that as well. We haven't released that yet, but it's forthcoming. But what really matters are the impact metrics, the second dimension. How can we correlate those utilization metrics to these other metrics like speed, PR throughput, our perceived rate of delivery, what we call our developer experience index, which I will briefly introduce a little bit later. And then these quality metrics like code maintainability, change confidence, and change fail percentage. And then finally, cost. And so you can kind of look at this again as like a maturity curve. We see a lot of organizations like start with utilization metrics, then start gathering some impact metrics so that they can correlate that utilization to the impact. And then finally, cost. And I say finally because we're 15 years past the last major hype cycle and still seeing companies that spring up that can help you understand and control your cloud costs, right? But on the flip side, this stuff is happening faster. I do hear about engineers that are burning through $2,000 worth of tokens a day. And I know Arthur has some good opinions on how better context and engineering can actually help us control our costs as well.
Yeah, totally. The idea of managing the context well is to focus on iterating on the input it, than the output. So if you iterate on the input, you can have some repeatable process. You can have just one prompt doing one thing and use maybe less token than using maybe a shorter prompt, but if you iterate, if you making a pull request and having too many comments, and then you use AI again to handle those comments, you will spend even more token than just having a better prompt as an input. So yeah, really interesting to help the team to understand that focusing on the creation of this code with the AI, with the good context, with the custom agent, by splitting also the task in some small subtask, you can save a lot of token and a lot of cost.
Yeah, no, that's great. And there's other good techniques too, like being able to really have well-crafted system prompts or cursor rules or agent markdown, whichever platform you're actually using, so that you can trust the outputs that come out as well, and have an easier time. So yeah, really, I mean, I hope that a takeaway here is that, we can't just turn on this technology and then expect the entire organization to get the most use out of it, right? Like anything else, there has to be discipline. There's prompt engineering, there's context engineering, there's system prompt engineering. So a lot of aspects, and we need to take that time. We need to allow our engineers to take that time to experiment and learn and enable them on this technology. But ultimately, when it comes to measuring, these foundational developer experience and developer productivity metrics are still what matter the most, right? It's easy to get lost in this hype and forget that all of this really is about improving developer experience, and then developer experience is the leading indicator for developer productivity. So making sure that, we're improving our productivity. And that's why these metrics that we've already trusted for a while are still what we need to pay attention to. The trick is to just correlate those to utilization and like utilization cohorts across our organization. So some top companies have been doing stuff like this for a while, and we worked with them to derive this AI measurement framework. So we worked on it for a couple of months and worked directly with companies like Microsoft, who are looking at adoption metrics, system velocity metrics, developer satisfaction metrics. One of my favorite metrics that they have is what they call a bad developer day. I could do a whole webinar on Microsoft Bad Developer Days, but I recommend you check out the white paper on it. It's very cool metric, and then correlating that to whether AI is decreasing the number of bad developer days or increasing it. Dropbox looking at similar stuff. Weekly active user, daily active user. Everybody's looking at change fail percentage as a quality metric. It's just good. It's a metric we can trust from Dora, as long as we define it the way that Dora says to define it. Which is if we've added something of value to our customers and we have to back that out, that's considered a change failure. And then booking.com, again, you just see some common patterns here: developer satisfaction, PR throughput, and adoption metrics like daily active user, weekly active user. So this is where, when we found commonality across these different companies, where they were looking at particular metrics, that we put them in our own metric framework. And I think that the biggest takeaway here, you can just see some of what other companies are looking at. You can go back in the recording and study these if you want to, or maybe we'll make the slides available. We can figure that out. But these core metrics and benchmarks are still what's most important. The AI metrics themselves, like the utilization metrics, are telling us what's happening with the AI, but the core metrics are telling us whether it's working, right? Whether it's actually having the impact and the outcomes that we want to see by investing on this technology. So that's why we say, like, look, it's good to gather what you can about utilization, but really only for the purpose of correlating it to these foundational and core metrics. Because again, just saying, oh, we have 100% utilization of AI in our company, that doesn't really mean anything unless you're able to also prove that you've improved your velocity and not at the cost of your quality.
And do you see a shift in the mindset of the people within those companies right now? Maybe we had a time where people were focusing on AI metrics and adoption, and maybe right now people are more getting into efficiency and core metrics. Is it what you see, or?
It really depends on, and again, kind of going back to kind of treating this framework as a maturity curve. It really depends on where organizations kind of are on this maturity curve. I've seen some organizations that have moved all the way through and they're already getting really good at tracking cost. And I see other organizations that have just started tracking things like utilization and just trying to get a handle. I will say and this seems counterintuitive, but large enterprises are actually proving to be a bit ahead of the game in terms of figuring out impact. And I think that that's because, good utilization of AI requires like clear AI policies and good change management practice. And these are things that enterprises have been kind of forced to work on because of their scale over the last couple of decades, really. And so it's interesting that I think that some of those investments are actually now paying off for enterprises who are rolling this technology out. It's not what you would normally think.
Yeah.
Small companies are certainly like utilizing it more, but we see enterprises actually reporting the most like time savings and things like that. So no, I think that I think that if there has been a shift in the mindset, and I think you can make a broader statement that like over the last 5 years or so, organizations are finally starting to try to pay attention to developer experience and like really take seriously the difficult problem of measuring productivity. It's very hard. It's part of the reason that I'm so glued to it and so focused on it. It's because it's such a challenge to help organizations with it. So I think we've had that broader shift, but then I think that, yeah, AI has accelerated the need to, where possible, move beyond looking at just utilization. But companies are still all over the place. We're still in this inflection point. Speaking of those foundational metrics, this is the core 4 metric set, which we believe is the best way to measure productivity right now. There's tons of information on our website, how you can engineer your own surveys. Like we have workbooks and things that you can go through to put together the same questions that we have on our platform if you want to start testing the waters with any of this stuff. But we're looking at like diffs per engineer for our speed metric. We're looking at this thing called Developer Experience Index, which is a composite 1 to 100 scale across about 14 different drivers, like change confidence, like code maintainability, like documentation, like developer environment toil. So all of these different factors that actually make up a developer experience. We're looking at change failure rate for quality. We're looking at this thing called innovation ratio for impact, which is the percentage of time that engineers can spend working on new features, which we think is an important output metric, where we think if you're driving better time savings, hopefully that means that engineers have more time to work on new features as opposed to just keeping the lights on in maintenance. We've also done a study on these high value use cases for AI. You'll find that in what we call our guide to AI assisted engineering. It's also on our website, which is a 65-page guide to prompt engineering and prompting best practice and high value use cases. We put this together by interviewing a bunch of S-level leaders, as well as sampling developers themselves. And it was really interesting when we did the developer sampling. It was a very simple study. It was just, stack rank your top 5 most valuable use cases for using AI right now. And we turned that into an interesting top 10 list. And so to be thinking about, some of these different use cases that you could become as an engineer or to encourage your engineers to be more reflexive in for higher value, these are things like trusting agents to do things like stack trace analysis, refactoring existing code, what we call mid-loop generation. So this is sometimes where it's like, okay, well, I need this function to do this thing. So I'm just going to write the function header and I'm just going to write a comment and I'm going to let the assistant fill in the actual center of that function, which is one of those areas where it's like, is this type of work actually something that we have to redefine now as toil? And where that's very important is optimizing developer experience is always about minimizing toil. But where that becomes a little bit philosophical, I mentioned that I've been writing code professionally since the late 90s. It's like, yeah, but that's the part of my job I really like, is writing code. And so we have to start asking ourselves these questions like, well, if there's a more efficient way to do it, and if we are writing code professionally for an organization, isn't it our responsibility to be as efficient as we can be. Now, if I'm working on a side project, a passion project, an open source project, that's totally different. But if I'm getting paid to write code for an organization, should I be thinking about what's really toil, and should I be thinking about letting the AI do some of that work for me? So some very, I think, like not surprising ones, like test case generation, learning new techniques, complex query writing, like regexes, for instance. I give a whole workshop on prompt engineering. I point at my bookshelf and I say, there's my mastering regular expressions book, and I haven't had to open it in months because I can just have the AI generate regular expressions for me now. Yeah, Arthur.
No, yeah, that really is something interesting, because companies and people always ask us what are the real use cases where the AI perform the well and the best, and we also think about refactoring existing code, migrating some code, and we spoke with companies in France, a consultancy company, trying to help other company to work with AI, and they only start with the same use cases, which is a migration from some version of the component to a new version. And they start by showing the different teams that it's working well. And then from there, from this point, you can try a new use case, etc. And it's really great, I think, to think about AI for some really specific use cases that you want to improve within your team, instead of just saying, okay, AI will help me on every part of my job. Maybe you like write tests, etc., but you don't like write commit messages or comments, etc. So yeah, it's really great for the team to see where AI can help them the most.
I think you raise a really important point there too, even though I'm very much about like optimizing for toil, because, you know, I've been so focused on developer experience. Yeah, that doesn't mean that if there are things that you legitimately like to do, that you need to turn it all over to AI, especially when we all know that everyone has something they don't like, right? I mean, like, I think, Arthur, you made a really good point there about like, maybe you actually sort of enjoy writing documentation. I'm one of those weird engineers that actually does like writing documentation, but I don't like commenting, to your point. You know, I would rather just flow and let the code come out. But I know that I need to. I know I have to go back and then comment and let, you know, engineers that come after me have some, you know, for posterity, have an easier time understanding the code. And this stuff is actually really great at writing those comments for you. I mean, it's much better still at interpreting than it is generating. So I think being very thoughtful about, you know, what are those areas that really do feel toilsome to you. And so kind of speaking of that, with all this good news about some time savings, when we actually look across a broad sample, this is almost 140,000 engineers that we looked at on an aggregate data from our platform. So this is a very broad sample size. We still found that the biggest time sinks were not, the biggest opportunities for improvement were not actually in code generation. Meeting heavy days are overwhelmingly, on an annual basis, the thing that's still taking the most time away from engineers. And that correlates to, you know, every year DORA puts out a state of developer experience report. They still talk about engineers, especially in larger organizations, only getting 5 to 6 hours a week to actually sit down and code. It being frequently interrupted, so sources of context switching, that also eclipses it. And then you start even these ones that are lower, the paler line there is where we're seeing potential for AI time saving. But if you start combining like build and test times together and toil over the dev environment, even those types of things eclipse the overall savings that we're seeing from AI. And so this is where we have to be really thoughtful too about how can we get creative in thinking about ways to use the technology throughout the SDLC and throughout the process of creating software, because so much of software development is not writing code, right? There's so many other aspects to it. We have seen that newer tools are outperforming older tools, which is an interesting trend as well. So like, you know, Claude Code and Cursor, when we see heavy use of those tools, like daily use of these tools, we do see the highest PR throughput. Now I would just, you know, caution to say that this is changing like every week. It seems like these tools are leapfrogging each other and still struggling to find feature parity. But I think it is interesting that when we look at the foundational coding tools, These newer ones clearly have an advantage in terms of accelerating velocity. And then I would kind of close the session out with some things. So just mentioning how those other sources of toil are what are really stealing a lot of time from developers. Thinking about what we can do in terms of using agents throughout the entire SDLC, and bearing in mind the words of Ellie Goldratt, who created the theory of constraints and is a personal hero of mine, that an hour saved on something that is not the bottleneck is worthless, right? And so we need to find the bottleneck and we need to fix the bottleneck. And there are a number of companies that are doing pretty well with this right now. So like Morgan Stanley, for instance, has been very public about their agent that they call DevGen AI. They've got a Wall Street Journal article about this, a Business Insider article about this. Basically, this thing is taking the place of reverse engineering legacy code. So it's looking at like mainframe natural, it's looking at COBOL. I hate to admit that Perl is considered a legacy language now because I spent a lot of time writing Perl when I was younger, but it is. And they're putting together specifications for developers that they can then use to modernize the code. And so it's saving almost 300,000 hours annually just by eliminating that reverse engineering step, which is really impressive. Zapier, I think, is an amazing example of how we should be thinking about this technology because they've actually increased their hiring. They have a number of agents. They call it more bots than humans within the company that handle all kinds of things. They've been able to reduce their stand-up meetings from 5 meetings a week down to 2 meetings a week. They've been able to accelerate the onboarding process to time to value for new engineers into within about 2 weeks, which is incredible because some of the highest benchmarks that we see is about 30 days, with some companies stretching out to even 90 days. And so as a result of this, like augmented productivity, they're hiring more people because they know that they can get more value out of a single engineer than they were getting before. And I think that that's the right attitude. Like this is about augmentation, not replacing headcount. And Zapier, I think, is an excellent example of that.
Yeah, I had a discussion yesterday with people during an event about the hiring and the fired of people with AI. And well, since we discussed at New York on this use case, I think it's really interesting to see that people in the company, the engineers, are here to create value, not code. So if you think about that and the value they create get you some values and some incomes, then you can be sure that if you hire more people, you will get more value, and it will be really great, instead of just thinking about cost savings and saying, okay, maybe we will be faster, so we will just cut the number of developers and have the same outcome. Yeah, I think it was really interesting to discuss with you, and you mentioned that this is the right attitude to adopt at the company.
I really think so. This is about augmentation, acceleration, but we're not at a point where we have end-to-end solutions that can truly replace engineers. It's about augmenting the value we can get from single engineers. And I think that's very important for psychological safety too. Canva has these great agents that are helping to translate from product managers to developer specs, which is not only kind of makes it easier for project managers to get specifications into things like Jira and prototypes with Figma, but these are written in a language that's friendly for developers, so it's easy for them to understand. So we eliminate that friction point as well. Fair is handling about 3,000 code reviews for lower criticality things like small configuration changes and things like that, providing feedback directly in the pull request comments immediately upon submitting the pull request, which is very helpful for getting that first pass of feedback and reduces a lot of the bottlenecks with code reviews. And Spotify's handling for SRE channels a lot of incident management. So they're detecting when a production incident occurs. Agents go and pull a lot of data and context from like SRE runbooks, and then gives a full summarization of the incident and SRE steps to to resolve the incident directly into SRE channels, which is helping with those critical few minutes at the beginning where SREs are trying to figure out exactly what's going on with the outage and what they need to be doing, just doing that information gathering. So it's helped to significantly reduce their MTTR. So that's all I have for you in terms of content. Again, a lot of this is summarized in this playbook that we've created. I'll go ahead and post the link here in chat as well, in case you want to grab that. But I think maybe we can close this out with a little bit more discussion and answering some questions, Arthur.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you a lot, Justin, for all of those insights. So if you have any question, use the chat directly and yeah, ask question about anything related to developer productivity, etc. And I will just add that uh, in the last discussion I had with people, we mentioned that now the agent will be part of the DSC and they will generate more and more code during the days. So it's really great to think that what feed those AI agents will be the context they will have as an input. And this context right now is written in Markdown files. So you will have a lot of companies working on those Markdown files, like you say, the GitHub Copilot instruction, the cursor routes, etc. So I like to say that in 2026, maybe Markdown will be the most important language for the development teams. Maybe not the one that will be the most used, but it's really interesting to see that this language, the Markdown files, will be the way to discuss with those AI agents, and it will be part of the fabric of the software, like the prompting system. So when we see people writing huge prompts and then removing those, it's really strange. It's like before AI writing some code, generating and compiling to some application, and then deleting the code. Now the prompt and the Markdown files are maybe the new source code for the companies.
I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I'm just thinking about different types of modality and the way that we kind of interface with all of this. Like, what is the new interface? I mean, obviously, natural language is going to be part of that. But to your point, like having really strong context, repeatable context that can be included with every prompt that's sent in throughout the organization, being very precise about the system prompts and even things like temperature that we send into our agents as we're creating our inference pipelines with agents. I think you're right. I think that's going to end up being like being able to write really good, clear, accurate Markdown. I think there's a whole new type of QE too that's going to be about not just understanding, you know, when an LLM creates bad code or low quality code, but also just understanding how LLMs behave and being able to shepherd a feedback loop from the engineering organization that can say, how can we continuously improve the behavior of these agents and models as well?
Yeah, I had a discussion with someone from Microsoft just before our webinar, and we were discussing about how to test and how to validate the quality and also the security of those prompts and the instruction you gave to the AI. Because I had a lot of questions of people working with our solution Packmind to create the context and the instruction for their agent. And they are saying, okay, if I make an update with Packmind for my instruction, how can I say if this update will be good or bad for the quality of the software? And it's really hard to answer because AI is not deterministic. And in the data you will use this AI, the output will be really different. So we discussed about that, saying that it's a whole new field that will just raise about the security and the quality and the test of the prompt themselves and of the Markdown files, I think, in the few months.
Yeah, we're going to see changes. And to that point, it looks like Laurent and Axel both have questions. Laurent wants to know, has AI been a success story within our dev teams at DX? Yes, but I will say too that our engineering teams is very small, you know, compared to a lot of other engineering teams, because we've already been like using all of what we do to measure productivity and try to improve productivity within that team. But yeah, we have multi-solutions that are happening now, and we're absolutely seeing good time savings. Axel has an interesting question too about Tune replacing JSON. It's way too early, I think, to talk about like whether Tune is going to replace it. I think there's no question that for writing agent markup, you know, that we now need something that's a little bit less universal and a little bit more focused on token efficiency and helping with, you know, cost of the context that we provide to our agents. And I think Tune is excellent for that. I think that in terms of replacing, though, I don't know, JSON has so much interoperability capability of being able to like help with API to API communication and all these things, and being able to be representative of doing its job, being representative of objects in JavaScript and things like that. That I don't know that it'll replace it, but I think we'll actually absolutely see engineers using both of those kind of side by side.
So there is other question from Virginie. How measuring these different aspects you detailed impact adoption internally in company you mentioned? Was it shared internally and impacting developer adoption?
Measuring these different aspects you detailed impacted adoption. Oh, yeah. So that, again, it varies, right? Like if we're doing more of a grassroots, which is what I recommend, like a grassroots rollout of various AI technologies throughout the company, where we allow people to experiment with different things and then share what they've learned and where things actually are working, then we start adopting that across the company. Then those adoption metrics are really there more about transparency, right? They're really more about kind of sharing with engineering teams, like, here's what we saw. We saw that when we saw better adoption of this use case or better adoption of this technology, then we grew productivity, or we increased quality, or we improved the developer experience in this way. Where it negatively impacts adoption, though, is what I mentioned before, with top-down mandates, right? If we're just trying to drive like 100% adoption through the organization, and we're doing it just for the sake of driving 100% adoption, that can actually be very toxic, right? Because you'll have engineers that are like, well, I'm being forced to use this technology. So Goodhart's law, if you're familiar with Goodhart's law,
Yeah.
when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
For code coverage, it's really great.
Yeah, right. Well, for all that kind of stuff, like PR throughput, everything, it's like engineers have to push 20 PRs a day. Okay, again, I will update the README file 20 times. Like, my numbers will look great. On the flip side, maybe I'm more senior and I'm a person who does more mentoring and reviewing. My PR throughput's not going to look as good as other teammates, but if you take me off the team, the entire team's productivity is going to go down, right? So it's like, we shouldn't hyper index on like the adoption metrics, I think, would be the big takeaway there, Virginia. But it can be very useful when we're building a culture of transparency around trying to share wins with the organization. It can be very useful for that. So Husami is saying that you mentioned that companies with strong development essentials seem to behave better when introducing AI. What are your insights about the required components to introduce in a team before talking about AI? That we could do a whole session on that. But I would say, everything we've learned from DevOps in terms of automating CI, automating test pipelines, high quality and accessible documentation. In fact, there's a lot of discussion about whether documentation even needs to be human readable anymore, and whether we should optimize for agent parsing of documentation, because we can then just have conversations about the code. So I would say you need to have good like DevOps hygiene and health. You need to have good code hygiene and health. And you need to foster a culture of education. There needs to be room for experimentation. Most companies will see their productivity go down before it goes back up after rolling this stuff out, because there's a learning curve. It takes a little bit of time for people to understand the best way to use it. But that's a big question. I'd be welcome to reach out on LinkedIn, and I can give you more thoughts on that, because we could definitely do a whole webinar just on that. So, and then, is there a pattern for productive teams? Yeah. So, you'll see a lot of this, Arnaud, in that playbook that I mentioned before. In fact, we go over like 6 very specific patterns for companies that are doing the best with this. A couple of them are ones that we mentioned here, like, for instance, being creative about integrating across the SDLC. That definitely packs a lot more punch than just code generation. Measurement and being proactive about measurement and transparent about why we're measuring, and then sharing those. Also very important too. And then, yes, things like sandbox code execution, that's part of that experimentation. That's part of giving room for engineers to learn and enable. I would say that that's the number one pattern, though, is organizations that are creating both psychological safety around letting people know that this is not about replacing them, that this is about augmenting their capability. And then in that same vein, providing not just materials, but also time for education and experimentation. Those are the companies that are doing the best.
I see also another pattern, which is companies who have their own DevX team, developer experience team, or developer experience on AI team or platform team.
Mm.
So sometimes companies just say, okay, this is the role of the technical leader or the chapter lead. If they have time, they will find the time to maybe share insight about AI and some prompts, etc. And I think that's not enough. It's really great to see companies in France like Doctolib, for example, working on the developer experience with AI and sharing those things during conferences. And you can see that if you have a team or some people dedicated to the usage of AI and the productivity, you will have maybe more effect for a lot of different developers. And for Doctolib, there are only 3 people to work with 600 developers. So that you don't have to have 20 people working on that. But yeah, I think it's really important. I don't know if you have seen that, Justin, in the company you are working with a lot of the time.
Actually, it's interesting that you asked that. That's the next piece of research that I'm working on right now, is how the existence of platform teams seems to correlate well with ROI around AI.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so that's coming out very soon. I'm going to get a draft in front of my team for review within a couple of weeks. We're just pulling a lot of data on that right now. But our speculation, our hypothesis that we'll be trying to prove is that, yes, having a dedicated platform or even developer experience team is positively correlated with better ROI for AI. Because then then that gives us a new imperative too, where our platform and developer experience team should also be part of a center of excellence for rolling out AI in the organization. So.
Yeah, great. And we have our last question from Farouk, and then we will need to shut it down.
I know I could keep this up all day.
Yeah, but you have a flight to take.
That's true.
How could we adapt to those change with our prompt and context engineering tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think we both probably have strong opinions on this one. I would just say, like, continuous education is so important right now. You know, we have, like I mentioned, the guide to AI engineering that's out on our website. It's totally free. It's become required reading for a number of organizations at this point because it kind of has some of the good prompt engineering practice and best practice. But we are also going to be, like, I'm updating that guide before the end of the year. Like we're going to run the same study and we're going to get more up-to-date information on this because it is changing so quickly. So that's part of creating that culture of continuous education and improvement, is just making sure that you have someone in the organization or a group of people in the organization that are staying on top of this and providing that education and best practice to the rest of the organization. So.
Great. So thank you again, Justin. Thank you everyone for all of your questions. Like I mentioned, this webinar will be shared on YouTube directly. So I will share the link, and maybe Justin, you will share it also within LinkedIn. So yeah, you will be able to share it with different teams. So thank you again for your time. Have a nice flight and
Thank you.
new travel coming.
Yeah.
And hope to see you soon. And yeah, if people want to talk with you and ask a question, what is the better way? LinkedIn directly?
LinkedIn is probably the best way, and I'm really easy to find on there. My father is the only other person with my last name, so you should be able to reach me no problem. In fact, let me post this in chat really quick just in case. And yeah, I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn and to answer these types of questions, and would love to do another webinar another time, Arthur. This was a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, I hope so. We will have a lot of different subjects to discuss. So yeah,
yes.
that's great.
Thanks,
Thank you again. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye. Ciao.